Hi there, I'm Dan Wesley, and I've popped along this afternoon for sad reasons, actually. I was very sad to hear over the weekend of the death of Reid. Now, Reid was the bass singer in the Statler brothers, and if you don't know who the Statler brothers are, chances are if you're British and you've never followed country music, perhaps you wouldn't know who they are. But they were a very big deal for many, many decades, and certainly a huge influence on my early years musically. My dad had a couple of Statler Brothers LPs. One, I think, was a compilation of their biggest hits up to that point, and the other was a gospel album. And it's one of those rare occasions where you've got a couple of LPs and you love absolutely every song. I could probably even still sing you every single one of those songs off by heart. Really loved it. Kind of the reason I got into that kind of music. I'd heard of the Statler brothers many, many years before I'd even heard of who Bill Gaither was, for example. Really loved that stuff. So if you want to check them out, they had a massive career in country music. Many times I believe they won the CMA's Vocal Group of the Year in the 70s, and lots and lots of great, many years producing great gospel music as well. So by my way of tribute, and they also had an alter ego. I don't know if you've ever checked this out. They also put themselves out as a spoof quartet called Lester Roadhog Moran and his Cadillac Cowboys. And you really need to check them out on YouTube if you can, because they're mighty fine. They certainly are. A sort of spoof of an extremely low quality rural combo. And that's one of the other things I liked about them, a great sense of humour, and certainly Harold was foremost in that. So, and I'm going to do a tribute, my little tribute now, sing a song, and it's actually, the reason I'm going to do this is because this is the very first song I ever recorded. I was at a camp when I was a wee whippersnapper, and a guy there, this is back in the old days, had a 4-track cassette recorder. And so for the first time ever, I got to record myself and with like 3-part harmonies. And the song I chose was one of those songs from that gospel album of theirs that I had, or my dad had, back in the day. And it's a song all about Moses and how he was asked by God to bring the Israelites back home from their time in Egypt. It's called Led Out of Bondage, and I'm going to play it, just me and my little ukulele here. Now, I've already said that I can remember every word of those songs, so this is where I prove myself right or wrong, isn't it? The song went like this. God promised to lead his children out of bondage. He said he'd free them from Pharaoh's evil hand. He said he'd guide and protect them on their journey and lead them to the promised land. God saw the slaves in Egypt land, so God took Moses by the hand. He said, "Go tell Pharaoh to set my children free." Well, Moses, he wanted a way to get out, 'cause in his mind he was beginning to doubt. He said, "Lord, oh Pharaoh, he ain't gonna listen to me." The Lord said, "Son, throw down that rod." Moses did, and he cried to God. It turned to a snake, as evil and wicked as sin. Cried again with an awful wail, and the Lord said, "Seize him by the tail." Well, Moses did, and it turned to a rod again. God promised to lead his children out of bondage. He said he'd free them from Pharaoh's evil hand. He said he'd guide and protect them on their journey and lead them to the promised land. The Lord said, "Moses, I've got power and I'll be with you every hour. Now go tell Pharaoh to set my children free." Well, Moses did, but the Lord helped out. He sent a plague to the land about, and old Pharaoh told him to go and let him be. Well, they started out with a light by day and a fire by night to lead the way, and old Pharaoh, he suddenly decided to change his mind. So he gathered together his soldier band, got all them chariots throughout the land, said, "I'll let them Israelites go some other time." God promised to lead his children out of bondage. He said he'd free them from Pharaoh's evil hand. He said he'd guide and protect them on their journey and lead them to to the promised land. Well, they came to the banks of the ocean blue. They turned to Moses, said, what'll we do? Moses, he fell on his knees right there in the sand. The Lord said, Moses, trust in God. All you gotta do is just raise that rod, and over these mighty waters, stretch your hand. Well, Moses, he followed the Lord's command. The waters parted there in the sand. He saw a path that led to the other shore. The ground was dry, they passed on through, and old Pharaoh's armies thought they would too. But the waters fell, we ain't never gonna see him no more. God promised to lead his children out of bondage. He said he'd free them from Pharaoh's evil hand. He said he'd guide and protect them on their journey, in leading to the promised land, and lead them to the promised land. My tributes to the Statler brothers after the passing of Harold Reid, and I'm going to link down below a video that you can watch. They appeared about 20 years ago on a tribute show to another famous gospel quartet who were about to retire, and I'm going to put a link to that because they sang another Old Testament story in that particular one, so check that one out as well. I'm Dan Wesley, and this was my tribute to the Statler brothers after the passing of Harold Reid.